So I've been promising to remake this one for a while. I just kind of have a different perspective on it. I think some of my older content could use an update. I like to think I've gotten better at this over time. And sometimes I just have more to say. So End to Evangelion will be coming soon as I get OBS Studio figured out. And I may do Death and Rebirth if people really like End to Evangelion. So this is going to be a little different from some of my character profiles, because I think to really appreciate Shinji and Asuka as characters, you really kind of have to do a video that covers both of them, because they really are almost kind of one soul and two bodies. They're kind of both one half of a person that has been separated. And I think there's a mistake with the whole idea opposites attract. I don't think opposites attract, and whenever they try to make a relationship based on it, it always just seems very contrived and forced. What attracts is people who are complementary. That is, people who are similar in a lot of ways, but while their kind of differences aren't really the opposite of one another, they kind of fill in each other's flaws. They kind of correct the problems with the other person's personality. And that doesn't really mean they're opposite, it just means that they're kind of different, but compatible. Just in my experience, whenever people try to do opposites in romantic plots, it doesn't really work. So why are Shinji and Asuka one of the most popular romantic pairings in all of anime, or I guess in all of fiction? What is it about them and kind of the show in general that's kind of captured the imagination of so many people? A lot of people who don't even like anime like Neon Genesis Evangelion, and it is my favorite anime of all time. I think it's because whatever its flaws, however it's aged, it still kind of remains the gold standard for portraying real people with real flaws. The characters are deeply flawed in it, and it doesn't necessarily make them bad people, but it is by far the most realistic portrayal of mental illness of all time. At some point in time, I will probably do a video of my top 5 favorite anime characters, and Shinji and Asuka will definitely be tied for 1 and 2 respectively. If you ever want to know what having bipolar is like, being manic is very similar to being Asuka, and being depressive is very similar to being Shinji. And that's kind of, I think, the reason a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with both characters and with the series. People tend to see too much in Shinji and see too much in Asuka, and to be able to actually self-reflect and to kind of face your flaws directly is extremely difficult. I think it's necessary to become a better person, to kind of move on with your life and to grow and change, but it's extremely difficult and it can often destroy people. And I think that's kind of what they were going for to a certain extent. So let's just kind of talk about them and their relationship. There's kind of a perfect, I would say, kind of reflection of one another. For every trait one of them has, the other one kind of has a complementary trait. And that's why in kind of romantic fan fiction, they go so well together, because they can kind of find each other's flaws. So I'm just kind of going to go through a series of kind of contradictions between the two. Now, on the surface, Asuka appears to be very extroverted. She likes to interact with people. She hates being alone. She wants praise. She wants people to acknowledge her. She seems very dependent upon external validation. Whereas Shinji's extremely shy of other people. He's afraid to interact with other people. He just doesn't really know how to go about it. He feels uncomfortable with attention, etc. On the other hand, though, Shinji deep down wants a connection to other people. He wants friends, he wants people in his life, he wants people to understand him and to know him. In a sense, despite kind of hating himself for being a coward, he accepts himself as he is, more or less. There isn't really a fundamental dissonance between how he sees himself and how he projects himself to the outside world. There's a certain honesty and sincerity to him. Asuka, on the other hand, doesn't really want people to be close to her. She despises other people deep down, and it stems from a complete self-hatred and inability to really kind of accept herself. Seeking constant praise and attention is in borderline and personality disorder, and in a lot of forms of mania, is all about fundamentally hating yourself and being unable to accept yourself. A common feature in severe mental illness is idealizing other people. That is, you despise yourself so greatly, you place no faith in your own ability, to make judgments, and no faith in your own ability to be a good or decent person. And you assume that everybody else around you doesn't have your problems, doesn't have your flaws, and you tend to idealize other people. That doesn't mean you're not abusive and insulting towards them, but what it does mean is that you do seek their validation, and that's very true with Asuka. Asuka seeks for other people to praise her, to tell her how great she is, to validate her existence, because she fundamentally despises herself. And because she despises herself, she doesn't want people to get close to her, because then they'll see just how horrible she is. There's also the aspect of Asuka that kind of, the last bit of kind of empathy within her views herself as being so awful that she can't subject other people to her. Shinji sees himself as weak, but he fundamentally wants to reach out to other people. Like I said, he's self-critical, but he kind of accepts his own failings. And even if he doesn't really successfully work through them, he does have a certain inner strength that Asuka lacks. I think it's very telling that by the end of the series, Asuka is in a catatonic coma and attempts to commit suicide, whereas Shinji is the only functional pilot left. Of the three, or rather four, five if you count Kwaru, the only person who's still active by the end of the series is Shinji. Even when Ritsuko and Misato and basically everyone else has a breakdown and dies or is basically just completely unfunctional, Shinji is still the one to confront Tabris and to defeat the final messenger. So it's interesting that people call Shinji weak, and a lot of people go, well, Asuka kicks ass, Asuka's so much stronger, but she's in a catatonic coma at the end. So I think fundamentally Shinji is a much stronger person than Asuka is, and I think to a large extent that comes from being able to accept himself and accept his fallings, and not having this fundamental dissonance in his character. So Shinji desires close contact with people and is able to reach out to other people and is able to have friends with them. But Asuka, is anyone close to Asuka? I mean, Shinji's close to Misato, he's close to Kaji, he's close to Toji and Kenzuk. He doesn't necessarily communicate with them properly, but he is close to them. People do like him. Asuka isn't close to anyone. Her only friend, Ikari, she's largely friends with because the optics of it would look good. When she talks to Rei, she says we should be friends because it would be convenient and because the appearance of it would be correct. And I think that's also something very common in people with mental illness, and specifically people with borderline personality disorder, which Asuka obviously has, which is they're so emotionally dysregulated, they just try to imitate what other people do. They try to imitate social norms, and they try to kind of do what other people might expect of them, just because they don't have those natural inclinations. They may be someone who has no desire to interact with other people. They might be someone who just despises other people and sees them as dirty, etc. But because they have such low self-esteem and because they think they're wicked and corrupt, they try to fill that void by pretending to be a normal person, or rather pretending to be a full person. And I think that's really what Asuka does. If you look at her interpersonal relationships, all of it is posturing, all of it is not reflecting who she actually is. She doesn't have a core identity, or she despises her core identity. So everything about her is just a person acting. And when her act finally breaks down and she can't keep it up anymore, she's a complete mess and just kind of collapses. Whereas, like I said, Shinji isn't acting, he just shows his weakness to the world. But because of that, other people are able to accept him for who he is and care about him for who he is. I think another kind of irony of the series is Shinji is the Messiah. I've said this before. He naturally has nearly perfect piloting skills, whereas Rei just kind of fails in general, and Asuka's been trained since basically she was 4 years old to be a super pilot. Shinji effortlessly is pretty much able to kill angels. And even when he loses and he's on the verge of defeat, Yui intervenes and he crushes them with very little effort. So he is the Messiah. He's born with near limitless abilities. Whereas Asuka has had to work for everything, but she still can never catch up with him. The thing is, Shinji has no desire to be the Messiah. It doesn't fit with his self-image, and he just feels guilty about it and that he can't live up to what's been fostered upon him. I think to a certain extent that's why Asuka hates him, because she views him as being stronger than her. Not only because he can live up to who he is inside, but because external validation comes to him so easily. Whereas external validation to her is something she has to fight for. If the series was to end tomorrow, the last angel was defeated, Shinji could probably go on to live a relatively normal life. He would still be depressive and kind of a loner, but he's not dependent upon constructing an external identity based on what he thinks people want from him. Asuka, however, is, and as the series goes on and her piloting skills continue to decline, she has a breakdown because basically a combination of that, the kids leaving their school, people getting tired of her aggressive, caustic personality, mean that little by little, the external things that she bases her identity on are just getting stripped away from her. And like I said, it just leaves the core at the bottom. Well, let's see, what are some other kind of differences between them? I think Shinji, even if he's not able to express it, has a natural empathy towards other people. He can fundamentally relate to other people. He can understand their fears, their pain. He can get other people in a way Asuka can't. Asuka can't relate to other people. She can just act. She can basically and I have this issue when I go through a manic phase or a borderline phase. I can't really understand or empathize with other people. If anything, I despise them. But because of my self-hatred, I pretend that I can. Or I remember something I've seen somebody else do. Or remember something I see on TV, and I just copy that. And the pain of not being able to relate to other people or feel genuine emotion is massive. And to a large extent, I think that's why people kill themselves, because the inability to really experience reality in a normal human way goes against all of your fundamental instincts. It's kind of this clash between who you are and what you are. You're a human, but who you are is not particularly human in the way you approach the world. So Shinji is able to relate to people. He's not able to reach out to them. He's not really able to display confidence or talk to them, but he can relate to them. Whereas Asuka, of course, is the opposite. She can interact with people. She has an extremely forceful personality that she can project on others, but she has no ability to empathize with them. She has no ability to relate to them. So let's just, now that we've kind of established some of the ways which they're kind of complementary, or rather the fundamental differences between them, why do they make such a good couple? Why do people love them so much? Why do they complement each other so well? How would they in essence complete each other? Shinji can offer Asuka the thing that she wants more than anything else in the life. His kind of unconditional love. I think more than anything, that's what Asuka needs. She needs someone who will love her for what she is. who can kind of empathize and can see the broken core of her and can accept it. She can't really believe that anyone could accept her. She doesn't believe that she fundamentally deserves love or deserves to be close to someone else. Shinji can love her. He can love her unconditionally. He has this inner strength that he may not always express, but he can take whatever her jabs and barbs are and continue to love her. And I think that's what Asuka needs more than anything else, is needs one person to just be there for her. One person to accept her. One person to tell her she's not as bad as she seems. And I think to a certain extent that's why she's so vicious towards him and tries to drive him away throughout the series. Because she's so terrified of this person who could love her unconditionally getting close to her and loving her. And she has very contradictory kind of mixed signals towards Shinji. She kisses him kind of in an attempt to get him to actively go after her, but then she, at the last minute, changes her mind and pretends that he was disgusting. And actually, there's a story based on this called, I think it's Love and Trust, or Trust and Love. If I remember, I'll post a link to it. But in the story, when they're kissing, Shinji embraces her by accident. And Asuka finally kind of has the validation she needs and feels genuine affection, and they wind up getting together over it, and they both become much stronger people. Asuka, on the other hand, is able to bring Shinji out of his shell, to kind of instill him with her confidence, to get him to take kind of the inner kind of strength and compassion and kind of to project it outward. All Shinji really needs to truly become the ultimate, to really kind of live up to his thing of a messiah, is just a little strength. Is kind of like, whereas Asuka requires internal validation, Shinji kind of needs someone to help him externally. And you can see this when his father praises him. He briefly becomes confident, although that kind of gets destroyed. But in that sense, Shinji's able to provide Asuka with unconditional love, and Asuka's able to provide Shinji with external strength. And kind of like yin and yang, they fit together in that way. Kind of in a related aspect, it gives them a role model, and it gives them kind of a permanent example of which to base their, Advice and Trust is the name of the story. It gives them an external person to kind of base their changes and kind of the way that they're going to start to see the world differently. Shinji will always, if they get into a permanent relationship, will always have Asuka there to look to as kind of his example of strength in the external world, as kind of an example of confidence, as an example of how to interact with people. And Asuka will be exposed to kind of emotion and feeling on a regular basis. They both really need the other to begin to heal and to kind of become a full person. And I think that's kind of the essence of the story, really, is Shinji's quest to kind of become a whole person. And that's why I like the original ending the best, because at the end of it, Shinji realizes that he's not as bad as he thinks he is, and he's actually a decent person, and he learns to love himself, and he learns to kind of fully embrace himself. Not only accept himself, because I think Shinji always accepted himself, but to love himself and to value himself. And that's why you have the thing where everyone says congratulations, because he's kind of finally become a full person. And once again, that's kind of what Untitled Evangelion is also about. It's Shinji becoming a full person. It's Shinji learning to not run away from the external world anymore. I think kind of one of the fundamental issues I have with both endings is I don't think it completes Asuka as a person in the same way that it does Shinji. He's kind of overly the focus, but Asuka's really the other main character. But I guess because the story's told from Shinji's perspective, a lot of things about her we just have to infer. Because from Shinji's perspective, she's just excessively cruel to him. and kind of violates this with brief moments of kind of trying to become close to him. And I think if Shinji had had a little more external strength, or Asuka had been a little more willing to just lay her soul bare to him, they would have gone together and they would have been able to do anything with the combination of their complementary features. So I think that is kind of the tragedy of them. And I think the fact that their relationship is so tragic and that they kind of dance around each other, that's kind of a thing in Evangelion where things almost fix themselves a lot of times, but ultimately something intervenes to kind of screw it up and to prevent the characters from kind of fully actualizing themselves. I think kind of another interesting thing is they're both, to a certain degree, Mary Sues, but they're kind of a very dark deconstruction of it. Asuka has all the elements of a classic Mary Sue. She is the product of genetic engineering, basically. She has a genius-level IQ. She's incredibly beautiful. She is incredibly athletic and strong. She does really good in school. She graduated from college. She's been trained since birth, basically, and told that she was special and told that she was kind of the savior of humanity and been built up and been given super secret military training in like a secret facility. And she has her special Ava, the first full production model. And even her introduction, getting her whole episode, is very Sue-ish. At the same time, though, she's a complete internal disaster, and her Sue-ishness collapses very quickly, both under the weight of her personality and her failings as a pilot. Shinji's also a Mary Sue. I mean, let's be honest, Shinji's very cute. I'm not saying this is someone who's gay, but I just look at him. Shinji's very pretty. He has beautiful blue eyes. He has a very kind of attractive personality to girls. And a lot of fanfics, girls really like him, even though he's incapable of dealing with it, because he's very sweet and cute, and girls kind of want to mother him. So you have that aspect of Shinji. You also have the ability where people just generally speaking like him. He also has these incredible abilities that are completely inexplicable, and he's the savior of humanity. And it's just something that's kind of foisted upon him. So they also kind of have Sue things, but they're also incredibly damaged, flawed people who self-destruct and undermine themselves constantly. So you kind of see what is behind blue eyes, what is behind being a Mary Sue. And that's kind of one of the things of Evangelion. That's another reason people like it, is it looks at the stress of living a military lifestyle. It looks at the stress of having two kind of unreconcilable identities, of kind of the mundane aspects of constant training, like the sync tests must be horrible. You have to go and like you have to go there constantly. They have to miss a ton of school. They do bad in school. They kind of have all the normal teenage problems while at the same time being expected to save the world. And in other series, it's really glossed over, or they're able to do everything, or they invent some lame excuse. But in this one, you really see kind of all the downsides of being in this fantasy world. Evangelion is to a large extent anti-escapism. Is to kind of show the dark side of a lot of tropes in anime or in any kind of wish fulfillment teen fantasy, for that matter, where you're inducted in some super secret world, you get your super hot girlfriend. Like, Shinji is surrounded by beautiful women, he gets to pilot a giant robot, he's the savior of humanity, he kind of has two love interests who are both absurdly hot, but his life is a complete mess. And Asuka's very similar. They're both kind of a deconstruction of the Mary Sue, although once again they kind of have opposite problems and they're opposite deconstructions. And if you were to take the best parts of each one and the best strengths of each one, they would become one perfected soul, one self-actualized person, one being who's able to face all the wraths of heaven and hell and to emerge from it all the stronger. And that's the tragedy of Eva, that they were never able to find that. And maybe that was the message of Ente Evangelion, that they finally were able to understand one another and were finally able to come together to create the greater whole. And it's interesting because ultimately Shinji rejects Rei. He's attracted to her initially because, let's be honest, Rei's hot, and also because she was nicer to him. But Rei is kind of an illusion. She's a fantasy. She's not really human. Asuka acts as being a human, but in a sense, her frailty and her inability and her struggles with the external world are the most human thing possible. Whereas to Rei, she's either completely exempt from the normal problems of a human, or she's just able to completely excel at them. So, to Shinji, he ultimately chooses to reject Rei and to go back because Asuka's the only woman who can complete him. And I guess that's kind of my problem with Shinji Rei Fix, is because their relationship just is very functional, but there's no fire to it. There's no, I guess, kind of actualization. There's no completion. They're just two fairly similar people who happen to get together, which is fine, and I enjoy Shinji Rei to a certain extent, but Shinji ultimately chooses Asuka despite all her flaws. And Shinji Asuka canon is pretty much confirmed in the manga, as after the Ente Evangelion happens in the manga. I have very mixed feelings about the manga, the TV show, and the movies. Generally speaking, I take aspects of the manga and movies, but I regard them as being semi-canon. Whereas I think they're canon only insofar as they don't contradict the TV show. Because I think the TV show was the most thematically consistent. It's why I like the last two episodes, whereas no one else does. Because I think they complete all the characters' story arcs. And Ente Evangelion, while very interesting in a lot of ways, is kind of a big FU to the audience. But ultimately, I think that's kind of what we could expect if there was ever a sequel, if there was ever kind of a continuation and it was consistent, which Anno's crazy, so it probably wouldn't be. But that Shinji and Asuka finally get together, they finally complete one another, and eventually they give birth to a child that is the best of both of them, and is able to continue the fight and the struggle for humanity's survival. They're in essence humanity's best and worst traits rolled into one, and that's another core theme of the series, is the question, is humanity redeemable? Does humanity deserve to be saved, or does it deserve all of its punishments? We see people at their best and their worst, at their bravest and their most cowardly, at their cruelest and in their most generous throughout Evangelion. And ultimately, the option is left to Shinji, who has this contradiction between being fearful of the outside world, but having the need to reach out to other people. And ultimately, he does choose reality. Ultimately, he does choose and say, whatever its flaws, humanity deserves to be saved. And I think probably the quote in the series, the two quotes that I think most sum up what the series is about, is when Rei makes tea and she remarks it's bitter, but it's warm. And that's kind of the experience of being human, is it's bitter from time to time, it's very painful, but ultimately it's warm, and it is the natural state. And there's also the, when Fuyusuke says, they're at the South Pole, and they say this is a sea that has been destroyed by the sins of humanity, and Gendo says that, and Fuyusuke says, I'd rather live in the real world, regardless of how contaminated by sin it is. And there's one other quote I want to give just from Dark Souls 2, because it's one of my favorite quotes of all time. An ember radiating a dull light, this flame seems nearly exhausted, but exhibits an eerie resilience. Perhaps this is its natural state. And I think that really describes humanity well. We constantly exhaust ourselves. We constantly face insurmountable challenges. We constantly get beat down. We constantly believe that we're beyond redemption. And yet we exhibit a resilience. We continue on regardless of the horrors we have to face, regardless of what we do to one another. Because within it, there is that resilience of good, the eerie resemblance of the divine. And rather than just to see this as kind of a temporary matter, that is the natural state of humanity, to be imperfect, to be constantly worn down and to reignite. But that is our natural state. And I think accepting that and accepting the failings of humanity is really what life is about. And through the kind of the joining in Asuka and Shinji, we get kind of a perfection of life. And I hope that made sense. Sorry, I kind of rambled on a long time, but it's a topic I have a lot to say about. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys later.